Hi everyone, nice to meet you all. I'm Ben Woodthorpe. I'm here to do a pivot table instruction and tips webinar with you today. I'm just going to run through a few things around how the webinar is going to run and explain how you're going to get the most from the day. Just to let you know, at the moment, I think we've got 75 people in live. There will be opportunity for Q&A, but do be aware, obviously, I'm one man. So I do my best to answer all the questions you've got, but I might not get through to all of them. I'll explain how that works. A couple of housekeeping things for you to be aware of. So obviously make sure you've got your sound on so you can hear me. You should be able to hear me at the moment. There's a Q&A button, which I'll show you a picture of in a minute. That's how I'd like you to ask questions. And at various intervals during the session, I will have a little bit of a look and see what questions have been asked, and I'll do my best to answer them for you. I do believe, and I'm new to this in Zoom, but I think there's an upvote button as well. So when you put questions in there, you can, as a group, upvote questions so I can see which are the more popular ones. Don't worry about writing too many notes, because later on today / tomorrow morning, I'll upload the recording of this session to a YouTube video and send you a link. So you're all going to get a recording of this session. So don't worry about, writing War and Peace. You can rewatch it if you want. I'll also send you a little one-pager. It's not going to give you every single thing that I've covered in mega detail, but it's going to give you the highlights. So you've got something that you can print out and run back through. Also, following this webinar, if you want to leave us a review on Google, just go search up Woodthorpe IT Solutions, and I would love a review. If you want to leave one, that'd be absolutely fabulous. So what are we going to cover? This isn't every single thing you can do with a pivot table, but it's going to kind of guide you from, if you are totally green, never touched one, I'm going to show you how to understand them, through to understanding how the maths works. I'm going to show you how filters work in pivot tables. Then I'm going to show you how to do a pivot graph. So for most people's purposes, in my experience of delivering training, this covers what most people are going to want to know when it comes to running a pivot table. To give you a bit of background to a pivot table, which again I'll go into more practically in a bit, if you've never touched one and it's just a word to you, a pivot table is a way of getting a big, massive list of data, which is really detailed, and shrinking it down into like a nice little summary. So it's a way of producing a report, really super easy as well. It's one of the, to be honest, it's one of the easiest things in Excel, in my opinion, to use once you know a few things. So this kind of covers start to intermediate level to advanced-ish when it comes to pivot tables. Okay, so really super important, because it makes it a way better session. Plus you get to see me run around like a headless chicken. Ask questions. Apologies for the terrible graphic that I've got there, but there should be a button somewhere in Zoom. I couldn't tell you exactly where it is on your copy of Zoom, because you might be on a Mac or a phone or whatever, but you'll have a button that says Q&A on it. Click on there. If you've got a question, like I said, I won't answer it straight away, but in at certain points I'll break and I'll try my best to answer them. If I can't answer them all, I'll kind of batch them up and answer them en masse in a follow-up email as well. So feel free to ask any questions you've got. Okay. Feel free to chat amongst yourselves in the chat window. I probably won't be monitoring that so much. I'm going to stick with a Q&A because that's easy for me to manage. But feel free to detail swap with anyone, chat. That's fine by me, not a problem. Okay, so I'm going to do one little plug. I want to tell you a bit about Woodthorpe IT. This is a really quick one, then we'll get into the practical stuff. So just in case you're new to us, we are a training organisation, and we deliver effectively Microsoft Office training. So Office 365, which encompasses things like Excel, SharePoint, Power BI, OneDrive. We do VBA. So pretty much any part of Office 365, if you need help with it, we can help you. And this webinar is one example of how we can help you or your organization. How can we help? So we can do online live training labs. We've actually built our own online live training lab tool called Hurdle. So that is a bit like a face-to-face training session, but you do it online and you get a computer to use right in a browser, and the instructor can help you. We can do large webinars like this, but closed off for a company. And even though we've got, many barriers to this, we can, COVID, etc., we can still do on-site training within the UK. Come to you with laptops and, go old school and deliver a session within your, your office, etc. So that's the plug over, and we're going to go on to actually have a go with pivot tables in a moment. But one thing I would like to do just before I start showing you some practical stuff within Excel is I just want to ask you a couple of questions via a poll, which are kind of going to help me guide the content a little bit. So I'm going to first of all ask you en masse what your experience with a pivot table is. And then I want to find out a little bit more about, how you like to learn, really. So I'm just going to launch this poll. It'll take a moment, and then we'll crack on and look at the actual pivot table tips. So I'm just going to put on screen a question about your pivot table experience. So if you could answer by clicking on the option which most relates to your current level of experience, that would be brilliant. So that should be up on the screen for you to vote now. Click away. I can see people are voting. Oh, here we go. Look who's in the lead. Looks like a fairly even spread, actually. We've got almost a third of each option being picked by everyone. So it's a nice mixed bag. So in fact, we've got 113 people in here. We've got 106 people out of 113 answered. So I'll give it another second or so for everyone to answer. 107, 108. Who's going to be the last? Who's going to be the last? Okay, so I'm going to end that poll now, and I'm going to share the results. So it's a fairly mixed bag here. We've got, a third of people in the group never used it. We've got a third of people using other people's, and we've got a third of people building their own. Now, lucky thing here is the content kind of covers off all three bases. So, there should be something for everyone, but that's interesting. Usually it's kind of, skewed to one way or another. Okay, I've got one last poll to do with you, and then we'll crack on with the session. So I just want to know your reason for attending this session. I'm just going to launch this poll. Are you here for personal reasons, pass knowledge on, or have you got a particular project, or have you been asked to attend? So if you vote on that for us, this is very clear cut as to why people are here. Much different to what we looked at before. So we're at 98, 99. 101 people have voted. We've got a lot of people who really want to know about pivot tables. Brilliant. Okay, I'm going to give that a couple more seconds just to finish off. Brilliant. Hey, that's exciting, that, isn't it? Let's just share that result. So you can see there what everyone in the room's answered. Everyone, well, the bulk of people here are a bit like me. You just love to learn. So personal learning and improvement. Fantastic. Brilliant. Okay. Thank you. I really appreciate you answering that poll for me. That'll help me, as I go through this, and also for us to improve in the future. So, pivot tables. First thing I want to start off with, and like I said, at any point, Q&A, ask a question. I'm not precious. First thing I want to start off with is I want to explain what it is, just in case you've never used it. So, if you see here in Excel, I've got a list of it's sales data, isn't it? I've got region, quarter, product, and I've got sales, and there's different products being sold at different regions, different quarters. And if I scroll down, it's quite a simple list, but if I needed to understand about what's happening sales wise, it's quite hard to know a pattern because it's just data in front of you. Well, what a pivot table does, it allows you to get a detailed list like this, which could be tens of thousands of rows long, and within 2, 3, 4 clicks, turn it into something like this. So this is a pivot table based on what I just showed you there. So I've got, the product called Cassia in Q1 did this amount of sales. The product called Cloves in Q4 did that amount of sales. So the pivot table turns a list into this, which is a report. Okay, so that's what a pivot table does. It's a way of summarizing data into a really nice, easy to understand report. So how we do it, I'm going to show you the steps of how we get to this, and then I'm going to explain how it works. Okay. So first of all, and I can see there's a question come through. I'll look at that in a moment. Let me just do a few bits of practical, and I'll come on to that question. First of all, I'm going to show you how to create the pivot table. One thing to be aware of before you do the pivot table, your main thing to get right is your data. And this is super important. And this is mentioned in that document that I sent out to you. Your data needs to be a vertical list. Headings at the top, rows down beneath, and it needs to be vertical. No way of saying that in any other way. If your list has lots of data going across, so for instance, if we had product down the left and you know, January, February, March, April, May across the top, that's not vertical. That's already kind of been pivoted. So we're really looking for a transaction-based list. Yeah, so transactional usually is the best way of describing it, vertical with headings going all the way down. Now, once we've got that data nice and clean and in that vertical format, we highlight our list, including our headings. Nice, quick, easy way of doing that. If you've got a big, long list, click anywhere in the list, Control on the keyboard and the letter A, that will grab all of that list for you all the way down to the bottom, just a keyboard shortcut there. After that, we go to the Insert tab and we click onto Pivot Table just here. Now this screen will pop up and we've got loads, apparently looks like loads of options. To give you the gist, the top section is where are you grabbing the data to create the pivot table from? And then the bottom bit here is where are you going to put the pivot table? So it's going to grab the data from what I've just highlighted, and that's the cell reference, or I could connect it to a database if I wanted to. There's other options I can go for. And then where do I want to plonk the pivot table? So I'm going to put it in a new worksheet, but you could choose to do existing worksheet, pick a location, and then when you build the pivot table, it kind of starts here and builds out across and down from that point. My preference is to just new worksheet, you know, choose the default. So all I've done to get to this point is highlight the list, insert, pivot table. I leave the defaults as they are, and then I just click OK. There's my pivot table. Now, when I showed you originally to explain what a pivot table is, it already had things in it. This is a blank pivot table. Now, how we construct the pivot table, we move these items here, which are actually the headings from my original list. So can you see region, quarter, product, and sales? So if I go back to my original list, look, region, quarter, product, and sales. They're the headings, and we move them into these boxes. Now I'm going to move them into these boxes without really explaining too much about why I move things where, because I'm going to explain that in a moment. But can you see the ease at which I created that report? 3 drags and I've created that report, and it's as quick as that. So I'm going to explain why I dragged things into these boxes now. So I'm going to take a copy of this and I'm going to do some color coding. Okay, so I'm going to color the various sections of this you know, copy of the pivot table so I can kind of explain what these boxes are. So can you see I've got a green section, I've got a red section, and I've got an amber section. So if we kind of go over to what I used before to generate the pivot table, which is I drag these items into these boxes. Imagine this box here called column, that's the green section, which if you look up here, that'd be the bit along the top there, yeah? Now, the amber bit, which again is this bit in here, the numbers, the maths bit, yeah? That is this box here. Can you see values just there? So imagine that's the amber bit. And then the red bit, which is down here, that would be here, yeah? So if you imagine these boxes, there's 2 things with a pivot table. You've got context of data, which I'll come on to in a bit, and you've got position. So we're right now talking about the position. So these boxes are kind of laid out. If you look at the fact that quarter I've plonked into there appears along the top, that's the green bit I'm talking about, and product, which I've put there, appears down the left, which is the red bit I'm talking about, and then sales, which I've put in here is this amber bit. Can you see that's in the middle? How these boxes are laid out kind of corresponds to when you drop them into there, where they go on the screen. So they're kind of trying to give you a clue in terms of how they've laid these boxes out. If that doesn't work for you, the other way of thinking about it is whatever you drop into there labels the column headers, whatever you drop into there labels the row headers, and whatever you drop into there, this box, the values, does the maths, does the calculation, and it puts the numbers in the middle. There's a fourth box, which I've got a whole section just about that. For now, I'm going to ignore that, which we'll come on to later on. I hope that makes sense. If anyone's got any questions around this, just by all means ask. But what I'm going to do, I'm going to get rid of the color coding. I'm just going to move it down a little bit because I want to show you how easy it is to kind of move these around. So if I don't want the pivot table to be like this, look, drag it out. It's just, get rid of it, drag it out, start again. So maybe I would like to have a region in the rows, product along the top, and I would like to have sales in the middle. Maybe I don't want it that way. I would like to actually have the region subdivided by the product. So I'm going to move the product down beneath the, oh wait, I've got something in the way. Bear with me 1 second. That error is because can you see I've moved this down below? And what I was going to do was going to make the pivot table expand over the top of where this was. So because I've put something in the way, the pivot table would crash into it. So that warning is because I moved something down here. I've just given myself a bit of space. So now when I come to do this, it shouldn't moan because can you see it's got enough space to do it without going over the top? So that was me being a bit of a plank there. But can you see if I move product from here to here beneath region, it subdivides, the region by the product. And then if I want to put quarter into here, can you see it splits it out by quarter? So it's super intuitive once you know what those boxes are doing. I'm gonna move away from this in a minute. I'm just gonna have a really quick look at some of the questions. There's a few come through here. Let's have a look. So Simon's mentioned 365 want to be able to do the base small check. Right, okay, so Simon is mentioning that 365's throwing him a bit on pivots. I'm assuming that's that maybe you've moved from a much older version of Excel and this new layout is a bit unfamiliar. The best thing is to use this layout in terms of what I was mentioning there with the position. For instance, where you drop it is where it appears. I'm hoping that sort of solves you out. Nick will be adding region as a filter. Yeah, we'll be looking at the filter box as its own thing. I can see that's been upvoted. So in a bit, I'm going to show you stuff to do with the maths, Nick. And if anyone else agrees with Nick on that, upvote it by all means. I'll show you filters as their own thing because they really warrant being their own thing really. Just going to mark off Simon's question. And Chris, as regards to this and legacy bit. Right, okay, so really good question there, Chris. So Chris Kelly is asking about, does what I'm showing you extend to legacy versions of Excel? So what Simon and Chris are, I believe, asking, they might have used Excel 2003. They changed pivot tables to this new layout in Excel 2007. So you've got Excel 2007, Excel 2010, 2013, and 2019, which is Office 365. They all have this layout. So loads of versions back. And then it's 2003 and below, they have a different layout. Yeah, it looks like that's what Simon's mentioning there. So I'm going to knock those off the question queue. Okay, cool. Again, ask away, and I'll do that throughout the webinar. I'll come and try and answer the questions. One last thing to mention about the layout, which I did forget, it does kind of feed into the next thing I'm going to show you, which is the maths. I was talking predominantly about position. So if you move it there, that's where it goes. If you move it there, that's where it goes. And again, the kind of where they are on the screen, that kind of relates to what it looks like there. So, put it there, it's on the left, put it there, it's at the top, put it there, it's in the middle. Yeah, that's position. And then the second one, which is a bit more wishy-washy, and I'm going to give you my kind of rule of thumb on this, which isn't all the time, but it serves you really well. context of where you put the data. So, and this isn't all the time, but if you stick by this rule, you're usually not far off. Numbers here, right? Something you want to do maths on here, something that describes the number here or here. So, I mean, if we look at what I've put in, I've got quarter and region. They are ways of describing how much money we've made, aren't they? Yeah, in the context of this report. So we have made, in this case, 168,402 crinkly bottom groats or pounds or dollars, whatever. And that money was made in the north during Q1. So the number, the metric, the thing you want to do the maths on goes in the middle. The things, I'm being really technical here, but the things that you want to describe that number, they go in the row or the column. To give you the more techie way of saying it, column and rows, they're called group by fields. So that will shrink down whatever you put in there to one of every unique instance of something from that data that you pull it from. So row and columns shrink down to unique items. And values, they're called oh God, is it summarized values by, I think it is. So what they do, they always try and do maths. So it's going to try and add it up, average it. It's going to try and count how many rows there are, get the highest value, the lowest value. And that's what I'm going to show you how to play around with next. You know, how do we change the maths, for instance? Okay, so again, if anyone's got any questions, fire it into Q&A. I'm going to crack on and show you some bits to do with maths now. So at this point, we've got our layout of our pivot table, and quite right, Nick, I've missed out the filters. Come back to that in a little bit. I won't forget that because there's loads of good stuff there. But the next thing I want to understand is, how do I change the metric that I'm being given for this report? So at the moment, I'm seeing what is called sum of sales. So that is the addition of all of the sales values for each one of those you know, regions and quarters, etc. But I want to change it. So how I do that is I pop this arrow down here. It's a bit fiddly and small, but you know, pop it down. There's one here called value field settings. I believe as well, if you click on the pivot table, go to pivot table analyze, it is also somewhere in here, but I'll be honest with you, I tend to use this down here. Let's have a look. Where is it? So I've gone and told you something that's not there in this version. The alternative is you can right click. Can you see value field settings? That's the other option. So I'll pop the arrow down, value field settings, and it pops this up. Now, this screen is, if you're from Excel 2003, this is the same, yeah? Quite a lot of what I'm going to show you is the same, slightly different screen layout, but they've not really messed around with it too much. So this is why it looks like it's from the 90s. We've got two sections to this. We've got a tab called Summarize Values By. That's what I'm going to show you first. And then we've got a tab called Show Values As. And usually, if you've been using pivot tables a while and you're a bit of a ninja with them, you usually understand this, but because this is in a tab that's hidden away, you've never even really touched it. And there's some really cool stuff in there. So first of all, Summarize Values By. This is the what I'd call base maths, yeah? So I am going to pick, do I want to sum, or do I want to count, or do I want to average, or do I want to max or min or product or count numbers? Or if you went further with maths than I did and I discovered beer and didn't do statistics, standard deviation, variation. So you've got all sorts of different types of maths you can pick. So currently it's on sum. I'm going to change it to a count. So when I click OK, just keep your eyes peeled on these numbers here. They're going to change dramatically when I click OK. Can you see now they all become 5? So what, and also down here it says count of sales. What the count does, so if I go back to value field settings, can you see it's got it selected? That's counting how many rows there are in that original source data for central Q1. And it depends what you're trying to get, but that could be significant, couldn't it? We could be doing a pivot table on a file which is all of the dispatches out of the warehouse, And we might, in the first instance, be interested in knowing the total value of the freight cost, in which case we'd use sum. But we might also want to know the total number of deliveries sent out the door by a particular freight company, in which case we'd use count, because we count how many rows there are. So just that little change can kind of change the flavor of the data we're going to get out of that list. Yeah. And we've got average, max, min. So we can change the story of the data very quickly and easily just by going to value field settings and picking what we want it to be. Yeah. So ones I tend to use: sum is the total, count counts how many rows, average is the mean average, so the total divided by how many there are, max is the highest value, min is the lowest value. They're the ones I tend to use myself. Product is everything within that group multiplied out by each other. I've never had a reason for that. Count numbers only count something in a row if it's a number. Standard deviation is kind of like I believe it's a statistical function, and it's all to do with an average. And variation, I'm not even going to pretend to answer that for you, but there's a good flow of things you can pick. So that's summarize values by. I'm going to show values as in a moment, and I can see there's a question from Chris, which, can you add multiple value data, sum, count there? Brilliant question, Chris. If anyone wants to upvote that one, go for it. That's a really, really good one. I've upvoted it actually, Chris. That's cool. So yes, you can. I'm going to show you the show values as first, and then I'll circle back to what Chris has asked there, because Chris is asking, can you have a sum, a count, an average, a max, all on one go, all in one pop? Yes, you can. I'm going to show you the other type of maths so that I can show you doing all the maths together in one go in one big thing. But yeah, feel free to upvote Chris. I've upvoted him. So summarize values by. Hey, look at that. Chris is getting a bit of love there looking at this. So how the second tab works, summarize values by, right? You first pick your base maths before you go into the second tab. So what we've got to think about here is these two tabs it's like a cake. Summarize values by is the base of the cake. Show values as is the topping of the cake. So you've got to get your base right. So if I pick a sum, whatever I do in show values as is basically the sum is fed into the show values as. So if I pick sum there, show values as takes the result of the sum. If I pick average, show values as takes the result of the average. If I pick count, show values as takes the result of the count. So you've got to pick what you want the basis of show values as to be first, and then we click into show values as. Now, I've not told you what it does. I've told you what I have to do to get there. What show values as is, listen to me, it's a set of calculations that you can pick where it will take the input from the first tab, in this case a sum, and it will perform a calculation for you. So the simplest one to do to show you first of all is one called percentage of grand total. So I'm going to click that. So this is going to do a sum, and it's going to work out what the percentage of the grand total of that sum is. So it's going to get this grand total for all the numbers, and it's going to work out what all of these represent as a percentage of that. I mean, that's pretty cool. I'm a geek, but that's pretty cool. So if I click OK, so look, I mean, I've taken like 30 minutes to get to this point, but this is like 4 clicks. So I now can tell you, and I've not really had to do a lot of hard work here, the South in Q2 is 4.98% of my total sales. The West in Q4 is 6.18% of my total sales. Can you see North is 20.67? Q4 was, so it's worked out the total, and it's given me the percentage as well. And look what happens to the pivot table when I start messing around with its layout. Can you see it automatically recalculates? I mean, just me moving that, if you were doing this manually, there's probably, just to change the format of that, there's probably like, conservatively speaking, if I was quick, 30 to 40 minutes worth of effort to get it right, check it. And I am just moving it and changing it like that while I'm talking to you, and it recalculates. There's other calculations in here. I'm going to pop the arrow down, value field settings. I'm not going to show you them all. I'm just going to give you a flavor. I could go for, so you've got percentage of column, row, parent, total. Let's go for, let's go for difference from, okay? So if I go for difference from, and then whenever it says of, or difference, or running total in, so if it says a from or an of or an in the description, usually what it does, it then tells you down here to pick what the from or the of or the in is. So I'm going to pick the fact I want to look at the difference between products, and I would like to compare all of the products to chives. So when I'm ready, I click OK. So this is now telling me, can you see chives goes blank? And this is telling me that, you know, cloves undersold chives by that, cassia outperformed chives by that. You know, so again, really slick what you can do with this. And there's all sorts of nifty things you can do with that. I'll show you one more thing, then we'll get on to Nick's quite upvoted question now, actually. So I need to get on with that. Let me show you one last thing that you can do with this, which is really slick. Value field settings. I'm going to go for a sum. Show values as, and again, I'm not going to go through this really slow because you can rewatch the recording. If I go for difference from, and I'm going to go for difference from quarter, yeah. Importantly as well, when you do these, you've got to pick something that's visible as well. Instead of picking a specific quarter, I'm going to pick previous. So I've gone quarter and previous, and because it's a time period going left to right, when I now click OK, this is the rolling difference of quarter to quarter. So quarter one is nothing because that's the start point. Quarter two outsold quarter one by that much. Quarter three undersold quarter two by that much. And quarter four outsold quarter three by that much. And yeah, like 3 clicks, 4 clicks. I'm talking to you while I'm doing it. You know, that would be a lot of effort to do that, you know, in any other way using maths in Excel. So then let's, sorry, not Nick, Chris's upvoted question. Let's get to Chris Kelly's question around the multiple values. Really good question. So to do this, I'm going to drag sales into there once. Now, before I drag it in again, which this is the answer, Chris, you just drag sales in more than once. But before I do it, just keep your eyes peeled. I think it's the column box here. So watch just beneath quarter. I'm going to drag sales into the values box again, and just watch there when I let go. There we go. Can you see I get one called values, a new box? I'll explain what that is in a bit. That's fairly significant. But can you see I've got sum of sales and sum of sales 2, and here I've got sum of sales and sum of sales 2 for you know, quarter one just there. So what that means now is I can come along and pop this one down, value field settings, average, click OK. So now for quarter one, quarter two, quarter three, I've got the sum of sales, which is the total, and I've got the average of sales. Now, if I drag it in again, sales again, pop the arrow down, value field settings again. Can you see it's eat, sleep, rave, repeat. It's the same thing over and over again. So I could choose to, and this is why I wanted to wait before I answered this, Chris, sum, show values as, percentage of grand total, click OK. So can you see I've got the sum of sales, the average of sales, and I've got the percentage of sales. Now those titles are horrible. I'll show you how to change them in a minute, but let's just come back to this values box here. If I drag values down here and let go, can you see anise seeds? You've got sum of sales, average of sales. So that values box there, it's really significant because it allows you to change where those multiple things are. Yeah. If I put values above product, can you see that sum of sales split down by the product, average of sales split down by the product, you know, the percentage of split down by the product. So, you know, 2 parts, drag the metric in you want to do more than once and change the maths like we were doing before. And then this values box is how we change its position. And then after that, if we want to tidy it up, you know, look, just click onto there, you know, sum of sales could be, I call it total sales 2021. Bit easy to understand that, isn't it? This could be average sales 2021, and this could be percentage of top sales. Oh, if I could type, that'd be dangerous. And can you see as you typed, it goes all the way down there and changes them? Can you see they change here as well? So you can type straight in the pivot table or pop the arrow down, value field settings. Can you see custom name, same place? Microsoft always give you like 2 or 3 ways of doing the same thing because they're fun like that. But yeah, I hope that answers your question, but it is drag it in more than once, move the values around, bish, bash, bosh. So I'm going to knock that off the question. I wouldn't agree, Sam. I don't know where I'm clever, sorry. Maybe that's the quiz because it was a really good question. But either way, thanks. Let's just knock that off. I'm going to leave Nick's up there for the filter to remind me about that. We're going to come on to that in a minute. Feel free, I'm going to move on in a minute and talk about filters. But if anyone's got any questions about what I've just shown you there, feel free to type something. If I've moved on and you've already you've typed a question and I'm doing something else, I will circle back later on. Just to let you know, when you remove one of your items by dragging it out of the values, and if you customize the name, when you drag sales back in, can you see it loses it? So you've got to be aware, if you've done a bit of customizing on the name and you drag it out, it does lose it. And it also loses the maths that you had. So dragging out is good, but you then do have to like repeat a little bit of work if you need to get it back to kind of where it was. Okay, so I can't see any more questions, so I'm gonna crack on. So filters, we're coming on to Nick's question that he asked what feels like an age ago. I'm assuming this is what you were talking about, Nick. So really good question. This is one of the things that always gets missed with pivot tables. There are shed loads of filters built into pivot tables. So it's this box here. So I've got a filters box, but I've also got, can you see these pop down arrows here? So I'm going to ignore the filters box. I'm going to go here. If I pop the arrow down, I can filter, in this case, the columns. So can you see quarter 2 and 4? I filtered that. Bring them all back. I can filter the rows. Can you see here? I can do that like so. But also, so that filters just the columns, that filters just the rows. If I grab, so I've got one thing missing here, region. If I grab it into the filters box, and before I do that, just kind of watch this area of the screen that I'm kind of hovering over there as I kind of drag the region item down into filter. So I'm going to drag and let go. Can you see I get one there called region? So these filters here only filter the column and the row. So that's kind of like hiding a column, hiding a row. If you drop something into the filters box just there, what that does, that gives you a filter at the top, which filters the entire pivot table. So if I pop this one down here now and go to North and then click OK, that is now only showing me the report data for North. So if there were no sales for quarter 4 in the North, that column would disappear. If there were no sales for chives, that row would disappear. So think of whatever you put in here as kind of like, and I'm going to sound like a 5-year-old here, like a mummy bear and daddy bear filter. Yeah, it's kind of like a global filter that applies to the entire pivot table. And then these filters are kind of like the baby bear filter because they only apply to their own area. It's locality, you know, global, local. That if you want to be a bit more, you know, less like a 5-year-old in its description like I am. And some things you can do with this, tick that box. You can select multiple items to filter. So that's a composite of central, north and west. What were the sales? And that would be hard to get any other way, because what we're doing there is we're kind of picking 3 regions, excluding a couple of regions, and we're just getting the figures for that. That would be a faff to do any other way. And look how quick I did it. So yeah, that's the gist of filters really. But for you people in here who have used pivot tables a lot, and you're probably waiting for me to, there'll probably be some people in here waiting for me to show them that thing that they're not aware of. Here's one, and this is relevant to everyone, by the way, but here's one that I almost certainly think, you know, this will be something you've not seen. So if you watch here, can you see I've put region in the filters box here? And before I do this, can you see the tabs at the bottom? I've got sheet 7, pivot, and I've got one called sheet 1. So sheet 7 is where my pivot table is that I'm working on. Pivot is where the original data was. And sheet 1 is like here's the one I made earlier at the start to kind of show you. So just be aware there's only 3 tabs, and I've got region in the filters. So I'm going to click inside the pivot table. I'm going to go to design, pivot table analyze. In different versions of Excel, it might be called something different, this tab, but you do have to be inside the pivot table for it to work. It'll basically be the one that isn't called design. I can't remember what it's called in older versions, but in this, which is the latest, it's pivot table analyze. I then go to, and this is a really hard thing to find because there's a button here called options. There's a downward pointing arrow there, just there, tiny. Pop that down. And then there's one here called show report filter pages, which is a bit of a mouthful. What that's going to do when I click it, it's going to create a tab for every single region because I have placed the region box in the filters section. So it's going to look at the fact there's a north, south, east, west, central region. So it's going to create a tab for each one of them. It's then going to copy this pivot table and it's going to plonk the pivot table on each tab, and it's going to filter using this filter here, each one of those pivot tables to the region. So the end result, I know that's a lot of info, but the end result is we're going to take this pivot table, which is one thing, and we're going to split it into, you know, separate tabs, which is really cool and really useful for report tabs. So how I got it? Something in the filters, pivot table analyze, after clicking in the pivot table, pop the arrow down, show report filter pages, and it pops this message up, which asks you to confirm you want to do this based on region, which is what I've got in there. This only works if you've got something in there, by the way. You can't do it unless there is. And then when I'm ready, I'm going to click OK. Keep your eyes peeled down here where the tabs are, because you're going to see new tabs come in. So 3, 2, 1, I'm going to click OK. Boom. So look at this. Central, east, north, south, west. So if I zoom into this one, look, central. So that's a pivot table just for central. East, that's a pivot table just for east. North, south, west. Now, I mean, I've done consultancy projects where that has saved teams 2 days worth of effort or a day worth of effort producing like a management pack. You can fiddle around with this a bit. If I go to region, pop the arrow down, I don't want to include anything other than west, east, and south. Click OK. I'm going to go back to pivot table analyze, pop the arrow down, show report filter pages, click on region, click OK. Look, east, south, and west. They're the only ones that appear now. So really, really useful, that one. Any questions, feel free to pop them in the Q&A. I'm conscious I might run over a little bit. It's a while since I've done one of these webinars, so apologies about that. I'm going to keep going. Obviously, if you can't stay past 1:15, you will get emailed a recording as well. So don't worry if you do have to go. I've got one last thing to show you, which is a little bit around graphs. I'll show you that. Take me about 5 minutes. And then at the end, what I'll do is I'll give you a little bit of a, you know, kind of like a review of what we've done. So how we do a graph, let's just get rid of this. Bear with me 1 second. So graphs, really, really simple to do. And they're kind of based on the same technique I've shown you so far. Click in the pivot table analyze. And then there is just one here called pivot chart, just there. So I click onto this and it pops this up, where what we do, we come along and we pick the type of graph we want to go for. So it's up to you what graph you go for. So you have to have a little bit of an appreciation for, you know, a graph and what it means. But I'm just going to go for a really simple clustered column. And then when I'm ready, click OK. There's my graph. And what you'll notice is, can you see here the labels change? So look, legend, axis, category, and value. So as opposed to it being row and column, it's, you know, graph-based stuff. Super important thing to realize there. I'm just going to move the graph out of the way. If I drag something out of the legend here for the graph, can you see the pivot table in the background changes as well? The graph also changes. So if I drag it back in, can you see the pivot table also changes as well? So they are inextricably linked together, you know? But I can change it to whatever I want. You know, we can do multi-level axis. So whatever you put in the axis goes along the bottom. Yeah, so can you see I've got product split down by quarter? Whatever I put in the legend, that creates the key. So legend is Microsoft / American graph chart language for what I would call a key. Axis, that's just axis. And then whatever you put in there, that's your maths. That's what's going to produce your bar for you. And you've got the same options. Look, we can pop this down. Value field settings. Do you want the graph to be based on an average? Would you like the graph to be based on a count? Can you see that changes it? And again, whatever you do here impacts upon you know, the original you know, data. So they are kind of linked. Okay, so I'm just going to have a little bit of a look at what we've got here question-wise. I might not be able to answer all of these, and some of these might involve me actually digging and coming back to you. Let's have a quick scan. So I'm having a look at what Miranda's saying. So, layout, right, okay, so Miranda is asking about analysing data from SurveyMonkey into Excel. So getting stuck in terms of how you lay it out, I'm assuming you're talking about the laying out of what the pivot table would look like. I mean, that really, there's no wrong answer to that, as long as you can read the data and it makes sense. The main difficulty with doing anything like this with a pivot table is understanding the source data. Have you got the data to produce the report that you actually want to produce? That's usually the toughest thing to do. Feel free, Miranda, if you want to drop a question on, contact us at woodthorpeit.com. You know, I can get one of the guys to have a look at that. But I'll be honest with you, I think that's a personal preference thing, if I'm honest with you. Bear with me a second, let's have a quick look. So, well, there's quite a few questions there. So I'm going to, Audrey's got a question mentioning graphs. Have a look at this. Can you save one, then change, say have more than one graph for it? But right, so Audrey's asking about graphs, and I'm assuming by this you're asking about, can you have your pivot table, can you have multiple graphs, different types of graphs based on the same data? Yeah, so what you have to do for that really is, it's a bit of a bodge job, but I would copy the pivot table. Okay, so I've got two distinctly different pivot tables, which I can actually then change the layout of. So if I wanted a graph which is based on quarter alone, maybe I want to do a pie, and then I want a graph which is based on products and quarter, I would have two pivot tables based on the same data. Then I can go and produce a pivot chart based on this. So this one could be a pie, for instance, and I click onto that pivot table, analyze. I'm going to go for my pivot chart, and this one could be a bar. Now those graphs are still linked to those pivot tables, but it means you can have different pivot tables. And it also means as well you can have a separate, you could copy a pivot table, have the pivot table formatted one way for the graph and formatted one way for the display. But the key there is, you know, just copy and paste your pivot table somewhere else. And in some cases, what people do when they do this, they actually put, if they're doing it for a purpose of a graph, put the graph actually over the top of the pivot table if they're not bothered about it. Okay, let's just mark that one as done. I'm going to pick a couple more. Let's have a little bit of a look. But yeah, so Tessa's asking, can you flip the graph so what is horizontal becomes vertical. So that is a matter of, oh, sorry, I'm just there's two ways I'm thinking I might answer this. One way you could flip the axis would be to kind of just change where the data is. So you're changing what's on the axis versus there, and that's just moving the boxes. The other way, I mean, again, I might be getting this way off the mark. The other way is you can click onto the graph itself, go to Pivot Chart Analyze. Oh, bear with me 1 second. No, it's in Design, sorry. And change chart type. We can change it from a column to a bar. That flips it. There is also switch row column. That's doing the same as me manually moving between the two. That's actually quite useful for a normal graph, because a lot of these things for the pivot graph are, in a normal graph as well. Hope that answers your question, Tessa. Let's have a quick look at some more. So here we go. I've got a question from Simon. This is more about the data. So is a secret to manipulating the data to select all and then filter rather than trying to select different columns? Yeah, so Simon's asking, am I best to pull all the data in from the source data and then filter it? So am I gonna filter the data and curtail it at source, i.e. my original data, so not include all of that, or am I best to filter it out here? Again, there's no wrong answer. My personal preference there is bring the whole shebang in, yeah, and then the pivot table's got the ability to filter out what you don't want, and you don't have to include all the headings in what you're doing. And it just, you might have not included a column from your original source data that you might want to include later. And Simon as well, just to go on to this, let's say, for instance, you add a new field to your original data. So let's say I've got one called cost gets added in. So I'm just going to do a really, really simple cost column. And here's my pivot table I based on that tab. Can you see cost isn't in there? So if conversely, the other way, I want to include a new column, pivot table analyze, I go to change data source, and then can you see that I can then re-drag over the data. So you're not set in stone in terms of what data you've selected anyway. And now can you see cost is in there for me to drag in, okay? I hope that answers that question. And do you know what, I'm just gonna pick one more and then I'm gonna do a little bit of a wrap up. Okay, so a simple one here. Sorry, what did you click to make the graph appear? So what we do, so Amadi, sorry if I'm pronouncing your name wrong, I do apologize. How you get the graph, you click into the pivot table analyze, and then we go to pivot chart, pick your graph, click OK. Brilliant. Smashing. So what I'll do, any that I've not answered, I'll have a little bit of a look through, and I'll try and do a bit of a round robin. I've got a limit to how much time I can spend today on it, so I'll do my best to answer them all. But what I want to do is just stick up a little bit of a, should we say, wrap up kind of thing. One thing I do just want to remind you of is just a bit of a shameless plug. We can help you with all of these areas within Office 365. And if you remember, we can do this online live labs and large webinars like we've just done, and on-site training. So we're there if you need any support, plug over. But yeah, just want to wrap up with you there. First of all, I appreciate all of you coming, because I know it's a fair bit of time to take out your day. I'd really appreciate if you could leave us a review. There is a feedback form that comes up at the end of this session. Feel free to fill that in. I will, in the email that I send to you, include a link to our Google review section. I'll send you an email with a link to the recording. It's probably going to take a little bit of time today to get that up there. And feel free to get in touch if you've got anything you want to ask. Just reply to that email that I sent to you, And if it's something we can help you with, by all means we will. But I really appreciate your time today. Sorry for the people I've not been able to answer directly, but it's been really great working with you, and thank you very much for all of your questions. And yeah, have a fantastic day.